Let's get spiritual, spiritual. I wanna get spiritual. Let's get into spiritual. Are you guys still there? Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tears for Tangent. I am your host, Patrice Johnson. Yes, I have another podcast. Well, it's the same podcast. This is just a side series of my main series. Oh my god, that was so wordy. I'm not a professional. I think you can tell by now. Yeah, so my main series is called A is for Alien. So yeah, if this is your first time hearing my voice, I'm terribly sorry that I serenaded you with Olivia Newton-John's 1980s classic, but you know, it's quite apt for the subject that we'll be covering this week, and also what I will be covering in the next installment of A is for Alien. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment of your time to subscribe to my channel and also hit the like button, even if you don't like it. That's what we're meant to say, isn't it? I don't know. I would say like leave a comment as well, but you know, the only thing you could leave a comment on at this point in the game is my singing voice, and you know, my ego is a little bit fragile at the moment, so I don't know if I'm gonna be encouraging that. So if you listened in all the way to the end of last week's A for Alien episode, I gave away a bit of a teaser that this week I'm going to be talking about the Green Man. And who is the Green Man, you ask? Well, that's a really good question, because no one actually truly knows. And I don't know why I do this to myself every fucking week. So in the past, I've had lots of questions about my own kind of brand of spirituality. And a lot of people have asked me whether I'm like a pagan or, you know, if I identify as a witch. And I guess that in a way I am a witch and I am a pagan and I am all those things, but I've never really actually sat down and given myself a kind of title, because I feel like spirituality, just like any other kind of form of self-expression, whoops, sorry, I burped, is a deeply personal thing. And that's the best part about spirituality, is that it can be deeply spiritual and personal. And I feel like that you know yourself so much better when you do find your own personal brand of spirituality. That being said, there are certain pagan traditions and dates and I guess rituals that I observe. So the simplest form of that would be the fact that I observe where the moon cycle is. And, you know, there's a two-phase kind of reason for that. Like, I feel like it connects me deeper to my place in the universe, being able to observe celestial bodies. And also, I think that in this day of technology and the internet and the availability of basically anything we want at any point instantaneously, I really enjoy the age-old tradition of watching the sky as a passage of time and a way to tell the time. Another part of my spirituality that I follow, not as probably as closely, but I do try to catch as many as I possibly can and do some kind of like ritual or, you know, and when I say ritual, what I mean is like I only hex people like once every 10 years or so. That's obviously a joke, but you do have to remember that when it comes to universal law, whatever you put out to the universe will come back to you threefold. So if you do start putting out hexes and bad intentions for people, you are gonna get back shit. And yeah, just don't do it. Sorry, I digress. So what I meant by that was by observing kind of certain festival days, certain kind of ritual days. I'm talking about days which fall in an annual cycle of seasonal festivals observed by many pagans in what is kind of more commonly known as the Wheel of the Year. So there may be certain festivals which even the mainstream are really kind of familiar with. So say Halloween, for example, is actually, you know, a pagan festival called Samhain. A lot of people are familiar with this kind of language and these festival days as being associated with the Wiccan faith. But, you know, just as with all religions, there are many kind of different sects of modern paganism, and they regard the certain timing of each festival differently, and also the importance that they place on each festival is different for people who believe different things. And so for me and my own kind of personal belief and how I like to practice my spirituality, I look at the Wheel of the Year and I see it as days that correspond with certain events that tell the story of the Holly King and the Oak King. So I invite you now to settle in for a little bit of story time, children, with Patrice Johnson. So a long time ago, the land that we live on was ruled by two kings, and they just happened to be twin brothers. Despite being brothers, they were destined to be pitted against each other in a never-ending battle. The Oak King, he always wanted the land to be bright and hot and sunny for the entire year. And the Holly King wanted the land to be dark, cold, and sleeping for the entire year. So, as you can imagine, they had artistic differences with how they thought the kingdom should be ruled. One day, when the sun was high in the sky and it seemed that night would never come, the Holly King drew his sword against his brother and they fought. Although the Oak King fought bravely, the Holly King struck him a mortal blow and the Oak King fell. Realizing what he had done and the implications of what he had done, the Holly King grabbed his brother and held him as he lay dying, bleeding. And the goddess came and bundled up the Oak King, and she instructed the Holly King that he must now rule the land the way that he sees fit. So with each day after the Oak King died, the days became shorter. Each night the moon rode in the sky for a bit longer. The days became cooler and the nights longer and colder. Snow began to fall. The land became dead and bare, and all the plants slept. Many animals slept through the cold times as well. Those that couldn't sleep found it very hard to find food and shelter. One night, it was so dark and cold that it felt like the sun would never rise again. It was that night that the goddess appeared to the Holly King and said, "Do not despair, your brother isn't dead." And as she stepped aside, the Holly King could see his brother, the Oak King, healthy again and young. The Holly King gladly stepped aside to allow his brother, the Oak King, to take his place as king of the land. And as soon as the Oak King was reinstated as the king, the days started to become longer. The animals and plants began to wake up. And from this time, this cycle continued every year. One brother, the Oak King, ruling in the green time, and the other brother, the Holly King, ruling in the dark. So this is an age-old tale of light versus the darkness. And from, a pagan perspective and a spiritual perspective, it's not a battle of good versus evil, which is what we're kind of used to when we hear stories like this, that there's, a ultimate evil and an ultimate good. What the light and the dark represent in this story is actually death and rebirth, and neither is good nor evil. From a practical level of being one with nature and thinking about the world, as a living, breathing entity creature, this story talks to us about how in the summer months, everything which lives will die, but everything that dies will later be reborn. And from a personal level, when we look at it, cycles of time, this story can be put across a day, across a month, across a year. And, it also represents ourselves, our own deaths and rebirths, as above, so below. When the sun disappears and the daylight slowly dies, so do we. And then when the sun reappears and the light comes back, we are reborn with the light. I personally can attest to that. I know even here in Australia, we have very mild winters. So we have winters that don't barely freeze. It definitely doesn't snow where I am. But, you still feel down. And when the sun starts to come back and when the days get longer, you can't help but feel better, Oak trees were very important to Druids, and they were always fascinated by the fact that the evergreen holly, which was hidden for most of the year entwined amongst the oak tree's leaves, would stand out against the landscape once the oak tree lost all its leaves come winter. So the Holly King is very commonly depicted as wearing red, and he wears sprigs of holly in his hair and it's tangled. And interestingly, he's most often accompanied by a group of 8 stags. So does that sound familiar to you? Because the imagery does seem to be very Santa Claus-esque like. And he probably was one of the inspirations for the kind of modern iteration of Santa Claus that we have now. And what of the Oak King? Well, the Oak King himself is a very mysterious character, and he has captured the imagination of many centuries of humans. So I've told this story about the Oak King because I'm drawing parallels to the fact that a lot of people believe that the Oak King in this story, which essentially tells the tale of the Wheel of the Year, is actually yet another iteration of the Green Man popping up. And that's what my episode's going to be about on Wednesday, because the Green Man, if you've never heard of him before, was an archetype that has evolved organically among many world civilizations and religions independently of each other. Seriously. So it's not just a Celtic pagan belief. This depiction of the Green Man is seen across many civilizations, and that in itself is a mystery. Also, this story is commonly retold in different ways. So even like the story of Gawain and the Green Knight, Jesus and John the Baptist, all of those kind of stories are very similar to this Holly King, Oak King saga. So I can deduce from this that these kind of stories are very important to the human experience. And I feel like if you saw a picture of the Oak King, the Green Man, you would feel like there is something familiar about that image and that it should mean something to you. But if you're like me, you don't quite know what. So I hope that you can join me on Wednesday when I go into this in more depth and I start to point out some, similarities that there are in, this kind of archetypal being in other world religions and other world civilizations. And, we can try and piece it together because if you look into it a little bit further, you'll find that for the most part, most experts are really at a loss as to how it was so pervasive across culture and time. All right, guys, well, that's just going to be it for today. That's just a little quick one, just because I didn't want to give too much away for the episode on Wednesday. Just another reminder too that when it comes to your own level of spirituality, that's the best part about having your own kind of personal faith, is that it doesn't matter if your imaginary friend isn't the same as my imaginary friend. What matters is that whatever your belief structure is, that it helps to make you a better person, and it also helps to make this world a little easier for you to navigate, because it's a fucking hard world out there. And I'm pro anything which helps people cope with just how cruel it is, because if there's one thing in this world that's a constant, that's change. And it's the way that we can deal and cope with change, which is what this story talks about. The light and the dark, the constant battle between death and rebirth, in whatever iteration that is in your life. Just remember, we have to be beautiful and excellent to each other, and just because something you believe may not be the same as what someone else believes, just like the Holly King and the Oak King, it isn't a battle between good and evil, battle between light and dark, and neither of those are ultimate evils or ultimate good. So it's about being two sides of the same coin and respecting each other from that perspective. I mean, and this is all coming from a girl who made Christmas cookies that said "Cool Yule" on cookies that her mum gave out to her friends. So I don't know if you should be taking spiritual advice from me, but